Sure, there must be thousands and thousands of questions that are piling up. I hope not. But anyway, what's up for tonight? Yeah.
Can you, the system of pardes?
Yeah.
Can you take one pasuk and go down each rung of the ladder?
I'm going to have to prepare for that. I will do it for you, but I can't. I don't want to do it right now because off the top of my head, it would be a little difficult. I just want to mention one thing about pardes, though, which makes it much more. Pardes means garden, an orchard. And in Kabbalah, pardes is said to be an abbreviation for 4 different levels of interpreting the Torah. There is pshat, which is the basic, simple meaning of the words. Then there's remez, that's the resh, which refers to allusions to other things. And then there's drush, which is more of a midrashic elaboration of those allusions. And then the samach is sod, which is the mystical, Kabbalistic interpretation. And it is said that every single teaching of Torah has these 4 levels. But what's interesting is there are levels of levels of levels of levels going to infinite levels. So, for example, in pshat, there is the remez of pshat, there is the drush of pshat, there is the sod of pshat, and in sod, there is the pshat of sod, there's the remez of sod, there's the drush of sod, there's the sod of sod, and you can actually take this to infinite levels of different types of interpretations. One thing I will tell you just as a general way, you have pshat, remez, sod, remez, drash, and sod. The way it really works is this. Pshat, it's like an A-B poetry rhyme, meaning to say, drash is actually linked to pshat. It's really an elaboration of pshat. And remez is like a kitzer of sod. So remez is really connected to sod, and drash is really connected to pshat. And that's very, very true, because if you learn midrashim, you will often find that although the midrashim seem to be far-fetched, they are actually occupying themselves with basic pshat questions. So drash is an amplification of pshat. But I'll try to give you a specific. I know that it gets more clarified when you have specific examples. I'll try to work on one. Yeah.
I've been told that to wear tzitzit all the way out is gaivadic, and that one should tuck in their tzitzit at least past the knotted portion. Is there a makor for this? Is it halachic?
I honestly have not heard of that. Again, let me just talk a little bit about the idea of having your tzitzit out. The makor in the yeshiva world for having tzitzit out is based on the pasuk. The pasuk describes tzitzit as ureisem oso, you shall see the tzitzit. And by looking at the tzitzit, I am reminded of all of the mitzvos of God, and that's based on the gematria, that tzitzit is 600, and then you have 8 strings and 5 knots, and that gives you 613. I look at the tzitzit, I think of the whole Torah, and if I have techeles, I think of ultimately the sea, the sky, and ultimately the throne of glory, the kisei hakavod. So that would be a very logical reason to wear your tzitzit out. However, the Arizal, others actually say to wear your tzitzit in, and Urisim Oso is referring to the mind's eye, contemplation of the mind, wearing tzitzit, not necessarily visualization. But you brought up a statement that even if you wear your tzitzit out, you should only wear the strings, you shouldn't wear the whole thing out. And you had heard that it was considered to be a bal gaiva?
Yeah, by 2 people.
I don't know, that sounds a little bizarre to me, simply because, after all, if you want to be literal about it, the only way tzitzit reminds you of the Torah is if you include the 5 knots, right? That's part of the 613. So how can you say I'm concealing it? And also keep in mind that many had the minhag to wear the whole talis katan out. Let's say Chaim Kanievsky right there. They wear the talis katan over their shirt. Now, if you're doing that, obviously everything is out. So I don't think you need to be machmer. I mean, the most I might say is that maybe the person meant if you're in a yeshiva where the people who wear their tzitzit out only have the strings, and you're doing something beyond what is the minhag, perhaps that would be improper. But intrinsically, I would not say that. Yeah.
What is Gehenom like? And Also,
Yeah.
is it as painful as lrefuah, or maybe even worse? And also, once the soul is departed, right? When you say Kaddish, so that to assist with the departed soul, is there only utility in doing so up to a certain period? Like, in other words, once a soul has left Gehenom and now is in olam haba, is there any use for continuing to say Kaddish for him at that point for years and years and years? Is it doing anything for that soul?
Yeah, the issue of what is Gehenom like is actually a question that, although sometimes, a person thinks they have experience. Well, I'll tell you, it's a bit of a joke, but it's a man had a very bad toothache. And he was saying things that a person shouldn't say. He was saying, I wish I was, he said he wished he was dead. So the Brisker Rebbe remarked to somebody, he thinks it's going to be better then, which means Gehenom is pretty bad. But you do have to understand that Gehenom is not physical pain. It is not physical pain. When we talk about burning, we talk about fire, we talk about needles in the flesh, these are just using physical descriptions so we could grasp that it's a tremendous anguish. But it is a torment of the soul. It is a torment that is spiritual in nature. The fires of Gehenom are not physical fire. They are the torment that a person has when they become fully aware. Well, there are different ways it's described. Some is you become aware of the life you could have been, the person you could have been, compared to what you were, and that creates torment. Or some describe it as the feeling, all the pain that you caused in your life without the defense mechanisms that we have to give us excuses. You bear the full consequence. So it is described as an awful, awful, awful torment. It's also described in a different way. There are different descriptions that you don't have a sense of Hashem being with you. In other words, there is this sense of utter isolation, that you're alone. And because there's not really a measure of time in the Gehenom and olam haba realm, even though you're not going to be there more than 12 months, and Baruch Hashem, many people might only be there a few minutes, actually, but you don't have a sense that, I'm only going to be here another 5 minutes. It doesn't work that way. You're in a realm beyond time. But the one thing I will say about Gehenom in a positive way is that as painful as Gehenom is, it is really therapeutic, meaning to say it's not there to punish. It is not an expression of hate. The closest analogy that one might give is that of physical therapy. If you ever knew someone, or I hope you didn't go through it yourself, a person breaks their legs, breaks their hip. And in order to walk again, they have to go through physical therapy. Now, the physical therapy can be excruciatingly painful. A person screams, a person cries, a person begs their family, let me go back to bed, let me go back to bed. And the family will say, no, you have to keep going. And it looks like sadism. It looks like mamish, they're torturing this person. But it's for the purpose that they'll get healthy enough to be able to walk. Gehenom is very much that way. God's ultimate plan is that a person should have eternal olam haba for their mitzvahs. But if a soul has been corrupted and besmirched by sin, it's like a broken vessel. It's not able to hold God's light. So Gehenom is the spiritual therapy akin to physical therapy, to repair a neshama so it would be able to receive God's light in olam haba. That is why, by and large, there's some exceptions, but by and large, the notion of eternal damnation is not such a coherent notion, because there would be no reason for God to create eternal damnation. Damnation, I'm using it as a synonym for hell, just as a synonym. Damnation's purpose is to prepare the neshama to receive the light of olam haba. Now, the role of Kaddish. Now, Kaddish obviously is not limited to mourners. We say Kaddish, so many times during davening in many, many different forms. Kaddish D'Rabbanan, Chatzi Kaddish, Kaddish Shalem, etc. The Kaddish that's called mourner's Kaddish is simply called mourner's Kaddish because it was the Kaddish that was set aside for mourners to say if they were not davening for the Yomad. But it's a well-known idea that Kaddish is not about the dead. It's not a prayer for the dead. There's no mention of that. It is really a prayer for the sanctification of God's name. And there is a medrash, however, that teaches us that the recitation of Kaddish for someone who died, particularly a parent who died, protects the soul from Gehenom. It lifts the soul out of Gehenom, and therefore Kaddish is a very important thing. You know, it's very interesting. I mean, I experienced this myself. You know, everyone, you know, we all here try to daven with a minyan every day. But you know, if you miss it, you miss it. Sometimes it happens. It's an interesting thing. When you're saying Kaddish for a parent, it really absolutely becomes an obsession. Like as soon as you wake up, if you have to go somewhere, you think in your mind, okay, where will there be a minyan here, there. And then, of course, if you want to daven for the Yomad, you have to think, will they let me daven for the Yomad? It really becomes, even a person who goes to minyan every day, the idea of Kaddish for a parent is something that's very, very special. And I can tell you, I know from my own experience as a rabbi of a shul, there are people who were not religious at all, not even Shomer Shabbos. But they were committed to say Kaddish for their parents, and they would come to shul to say Kaddish. And having to say Kaddish for 11 months, they became frum eventually. I mean, you know, what's going to happen? They're going to go to shul 3 times a day for 11 months, and then what? The day after, they say, okay, that's it. I mean, they got into a habit, right? And the habit actually was a very good habit. And that, I would actually say, I would be willing to say, is a bigger merit for their parent than even the saying of Kaddish. The fact that now they're keeping Shabbos, and now they're keeping kosher, and now they daven and put on tefillin. So, as you know, the minhag is we only say Kaddish for a parent 11 months. Why is that so? Because there's a tradition that even the biggest Rasha only stays in Gehenom for 12 months. I don't want to start saying Kaddish into the 12th month because I would be implying that a parent is a Rasha. So we don't want to do that. It is brought down that if one's parent is a bona fide Rasha, you should find a way to say Kaddish even for 12 months, meaning to give them that protection. Now, theoretically, so let's assume you know. Of course, you don't know. Let's assume you knew the Chayal, or whoever it is, was such a righteous or holy person that he's out of Gehenom after 5 minutes. So is there any point, in other words, is there any point in saying Kaddish when you know? Of course, you never know, but if you knew theoretically the person's not in Gehenom, so the answer is yes, because Kaddish is not only a way of protecting a person from Gehenom, it's also a question of elevating a person on levels of olam haba. So you're always going to have that positive elevation based on Kaddish. I do want to mention, too, that another very, very important thing that one should do for a parent during the year of mourning is learn Mishnayos. It's well known that the letters of Mishnah are the same letters as neshama, rearranged, and therefore a Mishnah is a very powerful limud that elevates the soul. Ad kedei kach, that the Beis HaLevi was a great gadol b'Torah, and his son was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, who was the gadol hador of the next generation. Before the Beis HaLevi died, he left an instruction to Rav Chaim that Rav Chaim should learn Mishnah for him, even though Rav Chaim was like learning the whole day. And the Beis HaLevi said, the day that you don't learn Mishnayos for me, you should not even bother to say Kaddish, because he said the Mishnah was more important than even the Kaddish. People don't realize that. Now, there are other issues about Kaddish you didn't ask. I'll just throw it up. I don't want to talk about it b'arichas unless someone had a question. There's always a problem. Let's say a person died and doesn't have sons, like Bnos Slavchad, only has daughters. Can women say Kaddish? Obviously, behind the mechitza, you need a minyan for Kaddish. A woman cannot say Kaddish at home, but can she come to shul and say Kaddish? So this is a bit of a controversy. I don't want to stir up anything. But Rav Yosef Soloveitchik of YU, the one who was Rosh Yeshiva YU for many years, he testified that when he was in Vilna before World War II, before the Holocaust, in the main shul of Vilna, he testified that at the end of that, there were two young girls, like 10-year-old girls, who had lost a parent, and they would come into the men's section. They would be in the back of the shul, and they would recite, I think they were twin sisters or something, they would recite Kaddish together. So he said there was a direct precedent for women to recite Kaddish, and the Chiddush was, even in the men's section, if they were all the way in the back. And Rav Henkin ruled this way as well, but other Rabbanim are not in favor of it, and they say that they should hire a yeshiva or hire, just like someone who's not married who didn't have children, we can hire someone in the yeshiva to say Kaddish, and some say that that is preferable. So if the question comes up, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Yeah.
In the Kuzari, it talks about who can receive nevuah.
Yeah.
It says that only direct lineage.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about Ovadia was a ger, so how would he?
Yeah. This is one of the. This is a chiddush of Rav Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari. There's not a clear makor in Chazal for this. Rav Yehuda Halevi has a chiddush that although a ger is a Jew, a ger is obligated in the 613 mitzvos, but because he was not born a Jewish, or at least because his lineage is not from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, a ger can never reach the highest levels which would make him a navi, make him a prophet. In fact, it's not even clear, like Rav Yehuda Halevi, that even the children of gerim would have that. In other words, Rav Yehuda Halevi seems to actually say you have to be a person who has a direct descent for Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So even if you were born Jewish, you might have a problem if your parents were gerim in that way. Now, people do have, some people have philosophical problems with that. There's God being discriminatory. It's hard for us to know exactly. Listen, in some ways, the same way a Yisroel cannot be a Kohen, so a ger cannot be a Navi, meaning the idea is that there are certain roles that are assigned to certain types and certain types of souls, and therefore one cannot complain if they don't have the soul that matches to the role, just like I can't complain if I'm not a Kohen, I can't go into the Beis HaMikdash and the like. But you're not asking that question. You're not asking the ideological problem. You're simply asking a very, very simple question. We seem to have a Navi in the Tanakh who is described by Chazal to be a ger, and this is Ovadia. This is the shortest sefer in Nach. It's a question if it's a sefer. Ovadia, the whole sefer Ovadia is only one perek. So people always ask, let's say you're a firstborn, and you're supposed to fast on Erev Pesach unless you make a siyum or hear a siyum. So let's say, you missed a siyum, so you got to make a siyum. What are you going to do? So we say, well, b'diavad, you can make a siyum on a sefer of Nach. Oh, that's great. That's a lot easier than a siyum on Gemara. But a sefer on Nach can be big. Book of Yeshayahu, 66 prakim. So, what is the shortest sefer of Nach that I could make a siyum on? So you might want to say, and in fact, I have said it in the past, but now I'm going to admit I was mistaken. So, sefer Ovadia. Ovadia is only one book. Problem is that Ovadia is part of the unit of the 12 prophets. It's called Trei Assur. They're called in English the minor prophets, but that's an awful name. They're not minor prophets, they're just smaller books, so they were written together in a single scroll. So technically, Ovadia is not a separate, I know I'm digressing, Ovadia is not a separate sefer. You'd have to make a siyum on Trei Assur, which is pretty big. Trei Assur would be around 60 chapters altogether. So if you want to know the shortest book, it's Megillas Rus. Megillas Rus is only 4 prakim, and you can make a siyum on Megillas Rus. Okay, but be it as it may, according to Chazal, Ovadia's nevuah is all about the eventual downfall of Edom, of Esav. That although Esav will eventually become the Roman Empire, very powerful in the Catholic Church, etc., but eventually Esav will have a downfall, limud Mashiach. This is the book of Ovadia. By the way, that's why it's the Haftorah. The whole book of Ovadia is the Haftorah for Parshas Vayishlach, which gives the yichus of Esav. Okay. Now, Chazal say, why was Ovadia chosen to give the nevuah about Esav? Now, any Navi could have been chosen. The answer is because he was a convert from Edom, a convert from Esav, and therefore he was chosen to be the vehicle to communicate the nevuah. So the problem is, if Chazal mean Ovadia was a ger from Edom, then how could he be a Navi if, according to the Kuzari, you can't be a Navi if you were not born Jewish? So the answer that some people give, but actually, based on what I said a minute ago, it's not going to be a teretz, is he was not a ger, he was descended from gerim, but he was actually born Jewish. But l'chara, that may not be an answer, because the Kuzari's point may not depend on whether you converted, it may depend on whether you have an unbroken lineage. So I don't know. Other than the only teretz I know of is that he did not convert, but as I say, I think that would still be a great difficulty. Now it could be, you have to be ma'ayin in the Kuzari, whether spiritual laws may have spiritual exceptions. In other words, it may very well be that since Ovadia's nevuah was not about the Jewish people, it was about the Edomites. So maybe for that category of nevuos, vis-a-vis the goyim, you can have somebody of non-Jewish lineage. In other words, perhaps the exclusion of the ger is only for nevuos that pertain to Am Yisrael. That might be an approach. Again, Rav Levi doesn't say that, but that might be one way of understanding it. Yeah.
So regarding mitzvahs, right? Because we know that goyim are prohibited from keeping some mitzvahs in the Torah, like Shabbat. What other mitzvahs are they prohibited from keeping? And, are they also punished for intermarrying with Jews? And then if goyim decided to take it upon themselves to also enforce Torah laws on Jews in their own Medina, like for example, the U.S. was to pass a law, giving the death penalty to Jews who break Shabbat. Would that be like a sin for them also?
So you'll have this Irish cop come in, hey, you touched that muktzah on Shabbos. He'll arrest you. Yeah, so there are two primary things that a non-Jew is not allowed to do. And the Gemara's lashon is he's chayav misa, but that doesn't mean he's put to death. That means in God's book he deserves to die, but not that he will be put to death. One is the keeping of Shabbos, and the other is the learning of Torah. So in fact, the Rambam is mashma that a non-Jew can do any other mitzvah that he wants. A non-Jew could put on tefillin without a bracha. A non-Jew could wear tzitzit. But the two things that a non-Jew is not allowed to do are unique gifts to the Jewish people, and that is Torah and Shabbos. Now, even with Shabbos, there was a Rav here in Yerushalayim who was nifter last year, Rav Yoel Schwartz, Zechreinu Levracha, was a big Talmid Chacham, and one of his many interests, he had many interests in many fields, was he was very interested in Benei Noach, in teaching Noachites, teaching Gentiles, not to become Jewish, but to obey the laws of Ben Noach. And he made a very interesting Kaddish that people don't realize. He says it's true that a non-Jew is not supposed to keep the 39 malachos restriction. A non-Jew is supposed to desecrate the Shabbos. But that doesn't mean, he said, that Shabbos should be treated like a regular weekday. He said even non-Jews should celebrate Shabbos as the special day when God rested after creating the world. So he actually advocated, which many people had not done before, that non-Jews who want to be righteous Noachites should make a meal in honor of Shabbos, and they should even say various benedictions in their native languages, but they have to be careful not to keep all of the malachos. So they would make a point of turning on a light or whatever it is in order that they don't fall under the category of goy sheshavas, chayav misa. In truth, even if somebody's in the process of conversion, and obviously if they're in the process of conversion, they have to be trained in the laws of Shabbos to know what to do and what not to do, but they're instructed they should do one technical violation, meaning even if they're going to refrain from not turning on lights, but one time they go into the bathroom, turn it on, turn it off, in order that you didn't keep a complete Shabbos. This is to this very day. we often give candidates for conversion that type of advice. They tell the story about a non-Jew that was enrolled in a conversion program, and he went to yeshiva. He was accepted in yeshiva because the conversion was imminent. And he was such a masmid. He learned yomam v'layla. And some of the boys were a little offended because holier than thou, you're not even Jewish. What are you doing? So somebody went over to him and said, you think you're so frum. You think you're better than us. He says, you should know, every time you keep Shabbos, you're doing an Aveira. And we see that you're keeping Shabbos all the time. So you think you're a big tzaddik. So the boy looked up and said, well, I carry in your Erev. Meaning to say, I'm Mechalel Shabbos. I make it a point to be Mechalel Shabbos by carrying in your, what you think is a kosher Erev, right? So that way he kind of combined the holier than thou with keeping the halachas of a guy not keeping Shabbos completely. Now, the issue of a non-Jew learning Torah is a very, very difficult issue. It is a very, very difficult issue. First of all, can that possibly apply to a non-Jew who is studying for conversion? Well, we're going to tell him, sorry, you can't learn anything. That would be crazy. He's going to convert without learning anything about Judaism. So there is a marsha in Masechah Shabbos, very important marsha, that does say that the prohibition of teaching a non-Jew Torah, it's actually two prohibitions. You can't teach a non-Jew Torah, and a non-Jew cannot learn Torah. It's both on the non-Jew and on the Jew. Does not apply to someone who is actively pursuing gerus. This is the marsha in Masechah Shabbos. And then we get into another question. Well, even if he's a bona fide non-Jew, and he's not even thinking about conversion, there are certain things I'm allowed to teach him. I'm allowed to teach him the Noahide laws. I'm allowed to teach him Torah Shebichsav, Chumash and Nach. I'm allowed to teach him basic hashkafa, like emunah in God, even though you're bringing in Torah sources, because these are things he has to know. And I could even explain halacha in a very basic way. I mean, let's imagine a simple thing. You're walking in the street, okay, not so much in Yerushalayim, but let's say you're walking in the street in Los Angeles, and you're carrying a lulav and an esrog. And some non-Jewish guy just asks you at random, what's that? So what? I'm not allowed to say what it is because I'm teaching a goy Torah? So it's understood that simple, basic explanations of what is a sukkah, what is matzah, that's not what we're talking about. So really, if you want to boil it down to very practical things, you don't teach it, you don't sit down and learn Gemara with a non-Jew, unless they're part of a conversion program. The intricacies of Torah Shebaal Peh. The Sheva Mitzvahs for Noach is fine. Emunah B'Hashem is fine. The stories of the Chumash and what we learn from them is fine. Basic explanations of halacha is also fine. But you don't go into the in-depth pilpulim of Torah Shebaal Peh, because that, once again, is, unless the person is converting, because that is part of the special thing. Actually, it's a machlokas. The Gemara has an interesting shaila. Well, what Noachide law is being violated by teaching the Goy Torah? So the Gemara says two possibilities. One is theft. Since Torah was given to us, when the guy learns Torah, he's stealing. And the other is adultery, because the Torah is compared to our wife. So it's machlokas if the particular assur is gezel, or the particular assur is adultery. But the Rambam does make it clear. The Rambam does make it clear that even though the lashon of Chazal is chayav misa, that does not mean he is executed. That just refers to kind of a spiritual sin. Now, your question about can Bnei Noach enforce Jewish law against Jews, I think the answer is no. Bnei Noach can enforce Noachide law, both against non-Jews and even against Jews, like not murdering, something that's a violation of Noachide law. Halacha recognizes the legitimacy of non-Jewish courts enforcing those criminal laws against Jews. but I don't believe that non-Jews have any authority to enforce halachic requirements against Jews. Yeah.
If limud Torah is so important and it's emphasized so much in our modern day society, limud Torah, then how could it be that certain women, for example, are not commanded in it? And also, how could it be that certain people have more of a knack at understanding things? Some people are sharper. If that's our whole, or one of the things that's so emphasized, how could it be almost indiscreet?
Yeah, right. Very good question. So the questions there are, if learning Torah is such a fundamental aspect of Judaism, Chazal seem to say it's the most important thing. Talmud Torah is equal to all of the other things. Then number one, how could it be that women are technically excluded from the mitzvah of Torah learning? Now granted, a woman does have to learn the halachos that apply to her, etc., and even the hashkafa, but she does not have a separate mitzvah of Talmud Torah. There's even a machlokes, can women recite the Birchas HaTorah? We paskin yes, but that's only because pragmatically they're chayav to learn those mitzvahs, but they don't have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah per se. How could it be that women are excluded from that? And the second issue was, some people are very talented in learning, some people are not so talented. And if Talmud Torah is so necessary for spiritual life, how could it be that some men are kind of shut out or excluded from the learning because of things that are beyond their control, just whatever, they were born a certain way. So the issue of women is a very, very good question, but I think we just have to trust God that all of the statements of Chazal, that Talmud Torah is so essential, are referring to the neshama of a man. The neshama of a woman is calibrated differently. What it needs is differently. Its nutritional, its spiritual nutritional requirement may not be exactly the same. And as a result, what is necessary for one gender may not have the same level of necessity for the other gender. To some degree, it comes from the fact that women are more naturally spiritual than men. So a lot of what Talmud Torah is supposed to accomplish, women come into the world with that quality already. Now, as we know, for most of the history of Klal Yisrael, there were not necessarily formal Jewish schools for women. The idea of the Beis Yaakov, the school for women, dates really from the early 20th century. Sarah Schnerer, who made the first Beis Yaakov girls' school in Krakow, Poland. The building is still up. And at the time, there was some controversy. Some Hasidic Rebbes in particular thought that this was an innovation, this was women's liberation in the 1920s, and why do we need to have girls having a formal Jewish education if for hundreds and hundreds of years, if thousands of years, it was simply a tradition they learned in their home as to how to run a Jewish home. But finally, the Chafetz Chaim and the Ger Rebbe, Ger was the largest Hasidus in Poland. Both the Chafetz Chaim and the Ger Rebbe said that the nature of modern society was such that girls were no longer picking up all of these things in the home, and they needed to have a formal system of schooling. And indeed, many, many years later, when Rav Shach was asked, who did he think was the greatest spreader of Torah in the 20th century? Who was the greatest Marbitz Torah? So everybody figured he would pick this Rosh Hashiva or that Rosh Hashiva or Chafetz Chaim or somebody. He said he gives the title of greatest spreader of Torah to Sarah Schnerer, because by training the girls to follow the Derech HaTorah, those were the husbands they sought and those were the types of homes that they created. And he basically credited the entire flourishing of the yeshiva world to Sarah Schnerer's Beis Yaakov. Now, regarding the issue of people with more limited intellect, I think, once again, the answer is going to be this. Barring someone who's, totally and profoundly retarded, and we're not dealing with that, but if you're simply talking about people who are smarter or less smart or the like, I think the short answer is everybody needs Torah. But the Torah that Hashem expects you to learn is calibrated according to your level, meaning your neshama needs the nutrients of your neshama. So just because a person, let's say, does cannot really chop, Gemara be'iyun with all of the chakiras and all of the lumdus and the like, okay, his diet might be chumash, his diet might be mishnah, his diet might be bekiyas, his diet might be pashat pshat. That doesn't mean he's not connected to Torah. It just means his connection to Torah is in a different avenue. You see, I think we're making a mistake when we identify limud HaTorah with the way we learn in yeshivos. The way we learn in yeshivos is one particular expression of limud HaTorah, but it's not the only limud HaTorah. So for the simple balabayas, his limud might be something else, but for his madrega, that's equally valuable. That will connect him to Hashem. He's doing the best that he can. Yeshivas today, Baruch Hashem, but they're different than they were in Europe. Yeshivos in Europe were elitist institutions. If I can use secular analogies, they were like the Harvard, the MIT, the Stanford, meaning the average boy did not go to a yeshiva gedola. The average boy went to cheder till around, I'm talking about from a religious home, went to cheder till around 14 years old, right? So he finished cheder at 14 years old, and then he went to work. Then he apprenticed himself to a tailor, a shoemaker, a cobbler. Very few went to university. That wasn't the issue in Poland and Russia. But they apprenticed, right? So what did that person do? Well, he remained a religious Jew, a frum Yid, and he would go to shiurim in the shul, din mincha and mariv. And there's even an expression that becomes a little negative, but actually it started off as a very affectionate expression. There's a name for a certain simple Jew. They call he's an Ein Yaakov Yid. He's an Ein Yaakov Yid. What does that mean, Ein Yaakov Yid? What is Ein Yaakov? Ein Yaakov is the work of Yaakov ben Chaviv, who took all the Agadata out of the Babylonian Talmud and made a separate volumes of just Agadata. Now, although Agadata is very profound, but on a superficial level, it's much lighter than the halachic portion. Stories, narratives, and simple balabatim, who were not always capable of advanced Gemara, they would hear a shir in Ein Yaakov. So it became an expression in Eastern Europe. An Ein Yaakov Yid is a good, devoted, religious Jew who says Tehillim, learns the Parsha, maybe with Rashi, and learns Ein Yaakov. And that's connected to Torah too. That is also Torah. And therefore, the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam applies to that person. Today, we say it a little bit of an insult. Now, what's interesting is, today, yeshiva is considered to be universal, meaning to say every religious family wants to send their child to a yeshiva, whatever it is, whether it's Yeshiva University or Torah, but a yeshiva. In other words, by and large, an Orthodox person does not say, my child's education ends at 14, Jewish education ends at 14. So yeshivas have become more universal. They're no longer elitist institutions. By the way, that has some interesting implications, because the whole derech halimud in yeshivas was geared to kind of brilliant people. These chakiras, this lumdas, these pilpulim. And when yeshivas were only populated by brilliant people, that served them very well. One of the issues that people who create yeshivas have to think about sometimes is, okay, when we had a yeshiva of geniuses like Volozhin and Slobodka, so we were learning this very high analytical, theoretical eon. But now we have a yeshiva that has all sorts of people. We have some of the genius types, and we have kids who are not so geniuses. Are they well served by all of the pilpulim, or should there be a more straightforward way of learning? It's a very, very good question. I may get in trouble by talking about this. I don't want to talk about it too much. But it is an issue. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky once made the observation that the whole curriculum of the yeshiva was geared to a different type of population than is the present constituency of yeshivas. And therefore the issue, it would be like saying that every college student has to take a graduate course in nuclear physics. It may not be the right course for everybody. So that's something. So when Mirza Hashem, when you start your yeshivas, you can think about what the ideal curriculum would be. Yeah.
What was the process that Hashem used to select Bilam as a prophet, and are there any parallels to how he selected Moshe?
Yeah. So this is an amazing thing. We have Bilam, who is considered to be a great prophet. So remember that Chazal say that the olam had a complaint to God. If you would have given us a prophet as great as Moshe, we would be righteous too. So Hashem said, okay, I'll give you a prophet as great as Moshe. He gave them Bilam. So first of all, you can ask the question, well, that doesn't really respond. The olam say, if you would have given us a Moshe, we would be good. So Hashem answers, I gave you Bilam, what do you want? It's not the same. But the deep answer to that is, they are the same. Meaning, Bilam and Moshe started the same way. If Bilam became a Rasha, it was as a result of his prophecy, because Bilam became infatuated with his power. That's the thing. Imagine you had the power to bless, the power to curse, the power to destroy. That could take you to a place of arrogance and gaiva. So yeah, Hashem gave them somebody who was just as great as Moshe. Bilam, it's not God's fault that Bilam made the wrong choices in life. Now, what was the process? You're asking me, with Moshe Rabbeinu, we actually have in the Torah itself how Moshe was inaugurated into prophecy, and that was the burning bush, right? Moshe is a shepherd for Yisroel, and he comes across this bush that's not burning. God is in the bush, and God says, I'm giving you a mission. Your job is to go to the Benei Yisrael and take them out of Mitzrayim. So we actually know when and how Moshe was designated as a prophet of God. Now, if you're asking me, do we have any parallel story with respect to Bilam, I don't know. I mean, the only thing Chazal tell us is, an interesting point, that God only appeared to Bilam in dreams and only at night. And the language is, God appeared to Bilam as if they bumped into each other accidentally. But I would suggest that maybe that's only after Bilam became a Rasha. In other words, based on what I said, at the very beginning, it was like equal with Moshe. So we just don't know. We don't know Bilam's prehistory. We only know Bilam from the time that he appears in the Chumash. We don't know everything that happened before. But apparently he was very, very great. Very, very great in nevuah. That's why, Aristotle had a very famous definition of tragedy. That's where you get the phrase Greek tragedy from. Aristotle's definition of tragedy. That is, tragedy is not when a building falls on a child. That's a very sad event. But tragedy is when a person is destroyed, not from something outside of themselves, but they are destroyed because of something inside of them. And that's tragic, because there's greatness, there's potential, there's so much ability, but there's something inside that destroys him. In that sense, Bilam, and by the way, Korach is the same type of thing, Bilam is a tragic figure in this sense, because Bilam was very, very great in nevuah. And yet, Pirkei Avos talks about the three negative qualities of the Talmidim of Bilam. Ayin Ra, in Pirkei Avos, Ayin Ra, a bad eye, which refers not to the Ayin Hara that we talk about, but it means he was jealous of people's good fortune. He begrudged them their good fortune. The second is Ruach Gavoa, arrogance, gaiva, pride. And the third is Nefesh Rechava, which means hedonism, taiva. Actually, these are the same three things as kina. Another Mishnah says kina, jealousy, taiva, lust, kavod, a desire for honor. Take a person out of the world. So kina, taiva, kavod. So the Mishnah of Bilam uses different names for these. So the kina is ayin ra'ah. The taiva is nefesh rechava. And the kavod is ruach gavoa. But those are really direct synonyms. Just two different Tanoim used it different ways. So that's the tragedy of Bilam, in which there was greatness. And side by side with that greatness was that deep, deep flaw in character, which he did not rectify. And that destroyed him. So it would be interesting to know. Yeah, again, you're pointing out a very interesting question about a lot of things, and that is, we only know of biblical characters when they appear on the scene. But there was a whole history beforehand, right? When Bilam appears on the scene, he's already a famous guy, right? Balak hires Bilam because he says, I know whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. Meaning, Bilam already had a reputation. Bilam had a life. Bilam had a history because he was a Navi. But we just don't know anything about that history. It's very true. Yeah.
I know individuals who are running summer camps in Israel this summer. And
Was they running a camp, you
running
said?
summer camps.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are obviously with religious people, and a lot of it's co-ed also. And the question that they're asking was really was in regards to like Shemir Sinai. I guess they were concerned about their own exposure to inappropriateness throughout the summer, and I guess they're also asking in terms of trying to understand like what's a healthy balance of maintaining Yusha at the same time also maintaining more normalcy also.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I'll give you an analogy. Many of you, I may have said this before, forgive me, many of you might have been part of NCSY or are familiar with NCSY, National Conference of Synagogue Youth. It's the OU's high school organization for high school kids. And NCSY is a tremendous organization. NCSY mainly has public school kids who come for Shabbatons and the like, and many of them become religious, become Shomer Shabbos, go on to yeshivos. Amazing, amazing, amazing work. And they do it because they connect to these kids with love and affection and care. And that's really what does it. I was involved peripherally with NCSY in the early 1980s. My friend Rav Yitzchak Zichrono lrefuah, was the head of the Atlantic Seaboard region of NCSY, so he wanted me to participate a little bit. And I remember the first, forgive me for digressing, but I think it'll be relevant. The first NCSY Shabbaton, I was there with my wife, and these kids, these ninth grade kids, public school kids, they were just running around like chickens without a head, screaming, and there was no Jewish thought that was expressed in any of it. So I said to my wife, what's going on? I have to sit around and just see a bunch of 14-year-olds just running around and fooling around with girls and all sorts of stuff. And I participated for around 5 years, and I can tell you that at the end of the 5 years, you still had new kids who were running around like that. But the kids who had been running around were Benei and Moshe Torah. You kind of stick with it, and there were real transformations. So NCSY I mamish love it because I see what it's done for people. Now, there is a problem. NCSY is co-ed, number one. Number two, because it doesn't really impose any standards on entry-level people. So not only is it co-ed, but the girls are not in particular going to be tzinuah either. Maybe some, I think they even wear pants, but whatever, it's certainly not hilchos tznius. Number three, simply because of a lack of education, the kids don't even have a sense of boundaries. In other words, hugging, kissing, whatever it is. Yeah, there are chaperones. The same type of chaperone you would have in a public high school. There are chaperones that they don't really cross boundaries, but certainly they're violating halacha. So I was married then, but earlier than that, when I was a student in Eretz Yisrael, so Rabbi Lowenbraun wanted Eretz Yisrael Talmidim to become like the teachers and instructors in NCSY. Because this way you get B'nai Yeshiva and they create a religious atmosphere, and that would be very, very good for the educational program. So my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Ruderman, was against single Eretz Yisrael Talmidim participating in these co-educational events. And he actually gave, I consider, an immortal interpretation of NCSY. He says, NCSY is like the Parah Aduma. Why? What's the characteristic of the Parah Aduma? Mitaher es hatmeim. If you're tamei, the sprinkling of the Parah Aduma waters purify you, for sure. But the problem is, all of the people who handle the ashes, they become tamei. So this is what Rav Ovadia was afraid of. He said, NCSY is fantastic for the kids who are not religious, but it poses a certain danger to the kids who are religious because it dilutes their standards. So his compromise was he encouraged married students to come with their wives, but he did not want single boys to come. Other yeshivas, like Yeshiva University, took a more lenient position. And it's a real hard question because obviously the potential for outreach is tremendous. And fakert, if you're telling me, a Ner Yisrael kid is too religious to go, so what do you, so you get less religious kids to go? As teachers, I mean. Who do you want to be as a teacher and an influence? Somebody who's more conscientious or somebody who's less conscientious, right? So it's a real dilemma. It is a real dilemma. And go back to your question, that is kind of the question that you're raising here. Here you have a summer camp, and the kids are not religious, and the co-ed, and the girls are not sanua, but there's a great potential for outreach. There's a great potential for kiruv. There's a great potential that these kids' lives can be changed for the better in positive ways. On the other hand, what do you do about the risks of, boys or whatever being exposed to lower standards? Kiruv works both ways sometimes, right? We think, I'll be a good influence on such a situation. Well, yeah, but they could be a bad, negative influence on you. It's like a broom, right? You clean up dirt, the broom gets dirty, So it is a real problem. Meaning every individual would have to ask themselves or consult with their rebbeim about what to do. But if they are going, if they've made a decision to go and they're simply asking what guidelines, if that's the question you're asking me, what guidelines should they follow? The basic idea is that they do the best they can. They should be mechaven l'shem shamayim. Obviously, they have to look at certain things. They can't close their eyes on everything. But, they try to control where they look, how they talk. They should try to, within the boundaries of loving their charges, to know how to keep boundaries. And I would also suggest that it'd be very, very important that they augment the camping experience with, let's say, their own learning sessions in which they can kind of spend an hour in which they focus on their learning and their tefillah, which can kind of build up a spiritual reserve that will give them the strength and commitment to face the challenges.
Is there a specific standard, even let's say for some people, like let's say now, a person's going to, get to work in Tel Aviv and things that sort during this time. Are there like specific halachic standards that have to be, accepted by everybody?
Well, you asked me in terms of hilchos sneas? Yeah. Well,
No, I'm saying in terms of men,
a shmir sinayim. So I'll tell you the truth. I'm going to be, maybe a little explicit here. It frankly depends a lot on a person's libido. Meaning to say, there are people that get aroused in terms of thought or the like at very little, and there are people who don't get affected so much. So obviously, one has to be very careful. If you're a person with a high libido, and these things do affect you in a very strong way, you have to be machmir, simply because it's putting you in a bad place. If you're a person who's less affected, and that's part of the rationale of the married student, because whatever, then you could be a little more makel. Remember, the Gemara itself says the following. The Gemara itself in Baba Basra says that if you need to go to a certain place and looking at women who are not dressed properly is unavoidable, meaning you don't have another route, so that's called leka drach acharina. So in such a situation, as long as you're not mechavein to engage in sexual pleasure, you're allowed to be mistakel. So I would argue that if you're committed to a camp program and your job is to take care of these students, then at that point you don't have another way to go once you've accepted the job. So in such a situation, we would be fairly makel in the laws of histaklos. But as I say, all of this has to be based on how it affects a person. If it's affecting you, maybe you shouldn't take the job, frankly. That's a very, very important consideration. By the way, let me point out, this is a big yesod in a lot of things. We have all sorts of laws, halachas, designed to create boundaries between men and women, that they don't cross improper boundaries. We have the laws of yichud, can't be alone. We have the laws of not touching. But you have to know that these laws are a minimum, meaning to say, just because you're complying, somebody would say, for example, is there anything wrong? I have a class, I go to college and I have a very, very nice young woman who takes classes with me. Is there anything wrong if I just go out to lunch with her? Not for shidduchim. Well, if you say, well, doesn't sound right, you don't do that. He said, well, it's a public place. There's no assur of yichud. We're not going to do improper touching. So you understand the issue here. The issue is that even if you follow every halacha exactly, that's not necessarily enough if it's a situation that could lead you into a bad place. So that very much depends on the individual. So I think that would be true here too. Yeah.
I've heard from the Vilna Gaon that Torah will strengthen midos even if they're bad ones. How would that work?
Yeah, so there's a contradiction. Actually, what you just brought up is a contradiction in the writings of the Vilna Gaon himself. There is one passage of the Vilna Gaon that says exactly the opposite. This is very amazing. All of us know that Torah is compared to water. Right? Everybody knows that. That's a statement of Chazal. But why is Torah compared to water? So there are a million interpretations. Water is needed for life. Torah is needed for life. Water purifies. Torah purifies. Water goes from high ground to low ground. Torah leaves the arrogant and goes to the humble. But you know what the Vilna Gaon says? This is quite amazing. Torah is compared to water because the nature of water is whatever is in the ground when you pour the water on it is going to grow. So if there's wheat or beneficial plants, the water will make it grow. Yeah. But if there's poisonous plants, the water will make it grow as well, says the Vilna Gaon. If you have good midos, you're kind, you're compassionate, you're modest, the Torah will be like water, and it'll be bigger, more. That's pashut so far. But this part is the Kaddish. But if chas v'shalayim, a person is filled with arrogance and jealousy and selfishness and egotism, not only will the Torah not make him better, the Torah will make him worse. Quite amazing. Now, the Vilna Gaon was no slouch when it came to learning of Torah. Obviously, this was his life, 22 hours a day of learning Torah. And yet, the Vilna Gaon said, without working on midos, the Torah can make your midos worse. That is one passage. Now, that's quite amazing. That's why the Vilna Gaon advocated the need of musar, the need of working on your midos, etc. But you are correct. You are 100% correct that there are other places in the Gra's commentary in Mishlei where he says seemingly exactly the opposite point. That Torah has the koach to refine your character and make you a better person. So l'chara we have a stira, right? According to the first thing I quoted to you, Torah makes your bad midos worse. According to the second source that you refer to, Torah can help a person have good midos. So the short answer that's normally given to this is it all depends on part of your motivation for studying Torah. If you study Torah and you have no intention to try to be a better person, you study Torah because it's intellectually interesting. You study Torah maybe because you just want to show that you're smarter than other people in your share. But you have no interest in changing, you have no interest in growing, you have no interest in improving. Then the Torah itself might make you more egotistical. And you can actually see that. Let's say a person is very competitive. I got to be the best in everything. I can't stand to lose. Well, you understand that learning of Torah could just be another avenue for that type of competitiveness. It gives me another way where I can show I'm better than somebody else. Masha Ein Kain, when you learn, even if you're not consciously focusing on Musar, but you learn with the hope that this will spiritualize you, and by connecting you to Hashem, you'll be a better person, then the Torah can help you immensely in your tikkun amidas. If you're asking me how that works, the process is a mystical process, but it's connected to the notion that when you learn Torah, you connect to God. God is the ultimate source of goodness. I connect to the source of goodness. So goodness comes into me, you see? Because I'm connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that way. Yeah.
So about the heter and mechira, right? Because we know that most of the post-scheme, they say it's not legitimate, right? But you have Rav Ovadia, Yosef, Rabbi Ovadia, Yosef, matir heter mechira,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Why wouldn't, like, what was his basis for maturing him? Because we know that there's a separate law that says that, it is assur for non-Jews to own land in Eretz Yisrael, and
Yeah. The heter mechira is the famous psak of Rav Kook, although there were people earlier than Rav Kook, that allowed the land on Shemitah to be cultivated if the land is sold to non-Jews. And to this very day, the Rabbanut relies on that. And that's why certain products, Shemitah year and the months after Shemitah year, will say in big letters when they give a hashgacha, and it's very nice that they tell you this, al pi heter mechira. It's interesting that depends on the neighborhoods. Let's say, Osam. Osam is a big food manufacturer. So Osam makes potato chips, right? So it's interesting. In the Haredi stores, the potato chips are not heter mechira because nobody's going to buy them. When you go to the airport in Tel Aviv, all the potato chips, I'm an expert in potato chips, all the potato chips are heter mechira. So Osam knows where to send the heter mechira stuff and the non-heter mechira stuff. You are correct that most, not all, but the most Gedolei Yisrael did not approve of the practice of heter mechira. And one of the arguments, not the only one, but one of the arguments made by the Chazon Ish, who was against the heter mechira, was that there's a clear assur in the Torah to sell land in Eretz Yisrael to non-Jews. It actually is forbidden. It is forbidden to sell land to non-Jews in Eretz Yisrael. Lo sechanem, do not give them an encampment in the land. So the Chazon Ish argues, quite logically, if you're not allowed to sell land to non-Jews, then how can you sell land to non-Jews in order to satisfy the Shemitah laws? Right? That's a strong argument. But the truth of the matter is, when Rav Kook wrote a whole book on justifying the heter mechira called Shabbat Haaretz, and Rav Kook was aware of this argument. The Chazon Ish was not the first person who noticed it. Rav Kook addresses the issue of lo sechanem, and Rav Kook points out a few things, and one of the things he points out is, number one, there are some opinions that lo sechanem only applies to idolaters and not monotheistic non-Jews. And since the land was sold to a Muslim is a monotheist and not an idolater. So there might be a problem with a Christian, but there'd be no problem with a Muslim. That's one answer. And another answer Rav Kook tried to develop was that this was only a temporary sale. The Torah prohibits permanent sales. And since this was only a sale for the duration of a year, that was not considered conferring a permanent ownership. Now, the Chazon Ish disagreed with these points, of course, but all I'm saying is there is a defense. This was a debatable type of issue regarding the parameters of lo sechanem. Do not give them encampment in the land. Yeah.
The Gemara the Daf recently was talking about the and the Gemara also said there also how the person should initially first legris, and then he should be like kohen and amalek.
Yeah.
It just just seems like, for whatever reason, that's not the minhag of klal by a lot of yeshivas. Now there are showing exceptions, but I think especially Chazal is saying it. So why aren't we doing that now?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. You quoted two very different Mamari Chazal. You quoted two statements, just to be sure everybody heard them. The first statement is that a person should learn where his heart desires. Meaning the most important thing is to learn those parts of the Torah that you love. That's statement number one. Then there's another statement that says that a person should first learn to acquire a lot of information and then delve into it in depth. Meaning, don't start delving into depth until you have acquired a strong knowledge base, a strong factual base, because otherwise you're just saying reasonings that might be contradicted by simple facts. So these are two different things. One is focusing on what you subjectively enjoy, which is an important principle. The other is focusing on how do you approach your learning. And the question that was raised is, it kind of connects to what I said earlier, that in yeshivos, we often emphasize the in-depth learning at the expense of the knowledge acquisition. And doesn't that mean that we are not following the directives of Chazal as to the right way of learning? The short answer is you're actually absolutely right. I mean, the Maharal of Prague in the 1500s had a very biting essay on the inadequacies of education in which we jump to advanced levels of analysis before we have basic understandings of things. I mean, a simple example. If you look at Pirkei Avos, and this is where the Maharal comments on this, there's a certain ideal curriculum. You start learning Chumash at 5 years old. And for 5 years, all you do is the Chumash, Nevi'im, Tanakh. And then when you're 10 years old, you start learning Mishnah. And all you do for 5 years until you're 15 is do Mishnah. And then only after those 10 years of preparatory study can you then learn Gemara. Of course, I mean, there was a little anachronistic, meaning at the time the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos was written, there was no book called Gemara, but Talmud there meant deep analysis. There was no book called Talmud at that time, which means it ties into the idea that know Tanakh well and know Mishnah well, and now you're ready to analyze. But we jump the gun, right? We jump the gun. We start Mishnah when the kid is 7. We start Gemara when the kid is 10. He's really never mastered all of Tanakh for sure, and even all of Mishnah. So the Maharal was very, very critical that we have to go back to Chazal's system. Now, in defense of at least of Yeshivat Ohr Somayach, let me just say that, what are you going to tell a guy who comes to yeshiva for the first time at the age of 22, and we tell him, okay, next 5 years you're only doing Chumash, and then the 5 years after that, only Mishnayos, and then we'll start teaching you Gemara after you've been here 10 years. Well, the guy would say, I wasn't planning on staying for 10 years. In other words, in a sense, when people start late, unfortunately, you got to short-circuit the process. It's not ideal, but that's what you're stuck with. Meaning we do the best we can. Meaning we have to jumpstart you on Gemara, even though you don't know a lot of Mishnayos, and the hope would be, you'll backtrack and fill in the gaps later. But ideally, we should follow that sequence. Now, the thing is, though, that's a teretz for Ohr Somayach guys who start coming to yeshiva at age 22. But if I have a 5-year-old kid, and I'm educating my kid, why shouldn't I follow Pirkei Avos? I think you should. And this, of course, is the famous Zilberman method that has taken root in parts of Eretz Yisrael, which indeed follows this 5 years thing. And one of the unanswered questions I have is, why isn't the Zilberman method universally adapted? Zilberman is still kind of a minority, kind of odd little quirky thing. No, it's not. It's not the mainstream system. Why not? Why isn't it the mainstream? As I say, I can give a teretz for a sameach, because a guy who comes to a sameach is not always going to have 10 years to wait till he starts learning Gemara. So we got to do the best we can. I got that. But if you're educating your child from the very beginning, l'chayra, the Pirkei Avos method seems to be the best. Zilber Menezes seems to be the best way of doing it. Yeah.
So when it comes to a bentor, right? Should a bentor maintain close friendships with non-Jews? If he becomes a bentor later in life, then does that mean that he has to start scaling back the degree of the friendships he does have? And on a separate question, is it a sin on non-Jews who marry Jews as well? Is it a sin for them?
Very good question. Now, let me remind you that one of the greatest of our leaders, Rav Hanassi, the author of the Mishnah, had a very close, intimate relationship with a non-Jew, Antoninos. Now, who is Antoninos? This is a very interesting historical question. He is described as the Caesar. He's described as an emperor. Is this a Roman emperor? Or maybe Caesar means governor, regional governor. The word Caesar is not always, in Talmud, is not always a defined term. If it is a Roman emperor, who would it be? Some identify him as Marcus Aurelius, who actually is a famous philosopher. And it actually makes sense that Rav Hanassi would have some connection with a man of that caliber. So you do see that even among the very great, friendships with non-Jews were possible, and they were not necessarily discouraged. So my short answer to you is, it ultimately depends on the character of the person. I mean, in a sense, you can ask me the same question about Jewish friends, right? In other words, the issue is, are they good influences? Are they bad influences? Are they moral people? Are they respectful people? Are they spiritual people? You know, so it all depends. Some non-Jewish friendships might be fine, and some might be very, very destructive. I know one of the hardest things of becoming a Baal Tshuva is sometimes having to tear yourself away from very, very close friendships of either gender. And that can be very, very hard. And the one words of solace I'm offering you is that it's not always necessary to cut it down, but sometimes it is. And those are going to be tough. Those are going to be very, very tough decisions. But as I say, it is possible to have those friendships even with non-Jews. But again, you know, you're limited in what you can do. You can't go to a non-kosher restaurant. There are going to be limits in how you interact with them. In terms of a prohibition, is there a prohibition on a non-Jew? In other words, the laws of intermarriage, are they prohibitions only on the Jew, or is the non-Jew also implicated in the Aveira? That's a very interesting question. It seems to be a machlokes. Let me just remind you that in the Parshas Pinchas, coming up after this Shabbos. So remember, Pinchas, right, you had Zimri, the head of Shimon, with the Midianite princess, Cosby, Basur, and they're fornicating in a public way. So what does Pinchas do? Pinchas kills them both. I'm not saying this is a proof because you could analyze that different ways, but Pashtus, if indeed she was culpable of punishment as well as him, that would suggest that the sin is on the non-Jewish partner as well as the Jewish partner. Yeah.
Especially being a Baal Tshuva and in the Litvish, system, there's a very high pressure to conform and to fit in, much more than the Hasidish type of Baal Tshuvas. How important do you think it is to actually fit in the Litvish system, and what would you say to a Baal Tshuva who's struggling with this?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm curious about your assumption that there's less pressure to conform in the Hasidic system. Is that's your feeling?
That in Hasidus there's like a lot more types of like everyone's crazy. So
Okay, I got you.
So.
Yeah. The issue of conformity is a very, very difficult issue. 100%, there's tremendous, tremendous pressure to dress the same, to look the same, to talk the same, to think the same, not have positions that are a little different than the standard conventional wisdom. Now, it's not always coming from the top up. It's not that your rabbeim are telling you this, but you absorb it just from the guys around you and the like, who are quick to put you in line if you try to step out of line a little bit. By and large, I consider that negative. I think part of being a religious Jew is to be committed to Torah and mitzvos, but to also discover your individuality and your identity. That's very, very important. Because when you try to squelch who you are, you're really amputating a part of yourself. And there's something called phantom pain. Even when you amputate an arm, you're still going to have pain, meaning you can't get rid of it. And that's going to cause depression, that's going to cause sadness, that's going to cause anxieties somewhere down the line that can actually affect marriage and all sorts of things, because you never were able to be yourself. So we have to find ways. Again, this is just, we have to find ways that within the commonality of Torah and mitzvahs learning, that we do tolerate and accept and even appreciate the fact that people are different. Now, it depends on the yeshivas, it depends on the rebbes, different places will be different. I don't think it's a judgment on the entire system that it's always this way. It's very commonly this way, but it doesn't have to be this way. And you try to gravitate towards people who are a bit more open, a bit more tolerant, a bit more accepting of different types. This is an important point. I made this point many, many times. Why are tribes so important in the Chumash? Right? The identity of a person in the Chumash was not just based on Jew versus non-Jew, but there was always a specific emphasis. What tribe are you from? Now today, we don't really have a sense of tribes, except unless you're a Kohen or a Levi. I don't know if I'm from Ruvain, or I don't know what tribe I'm from, right? None of us know what tribe we're from, unless, like Rashi, you can trace your yichus to David HaMelech, so then you know you're from the tribe of Yehuda. But so why are tribes a big deal? They have their own land, they have their own nasi, they have their own flag. Like, what's the big deal? And remember, we learned in Shoftim, the whole war of Pilegesh Begeva was fought over the importance of tribal prerogatives. Right? Binyamin was a sovereign nation. So I think the inner meaning is that each tribe had a unique approach in Avodas Hashem. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to create a Jewish nation that was homogeneous, that was the same, that was just identical. We have the Ruvain derech and the Shimon derech and the Yehuda derech, etc., which means the concept is to find unity within diversity, to understand that community does not mean obliteration of individuality. That's the role of the tribe. So I think that's what we should strive to do. Now, can you do it within the confines of the yeshiva? It's not always easy, I understand that. But try not to amputate the important parts of yourself. There may be parts that are negotiable, that are not so significant, but anything that's truly significant to you, you try to hold on to. Yeah?
Close to 4 decades ago at Harvard University, carefully observant students, married and single, set up a base midrash program where they wanted to, for kiruv, and they said that they will set up a chavrusa for anyone who wants to learn anything having to do with Torah, whether they want to learn an aleph or they want to learn more nevuah. And if they want to learn what Shabbos is, the married from students would invite other people to their homes for Shabbos. And it was their own initiative. Is there anyone doing anything like that today that you're aware of? Or did anybody write up that story?
Well, I have to check the history of that program. Was Rabbi Dr. Sternberg involved in that?
I don't know of any rabbis who were particularly involved.
Yeah.
I'm sure those students knew of Rabbi Sternberg and Rabbi Twersky.
Yeah.
But it was my impression that the students initiated this.
Yeah.
There was no financing. It was all student-initiated and
Yeah.
it was their program.
That's a wonderful thing. Those were the days when Harvard was doing good stuff. Sometimes those days are unfortunately long past. But I'm not aware of. I mean, if you mean the uniqueness of being student-initiated, I'm not aware of that. Most of the programs I'm aware of, have rabbis involved. But again, it's a very good idea. If you can help a fellow Jew, then try to do it. Try to do it. Even if you don't have a rabbi or a posting. And then if you have shilas, of course, you need to consult. But it's a wonderful, beautiful idea. It really exemplifies Kol Yisrael Ravens Elazar. Every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. I take responsibility. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
If Chas v'Shalom a Yid were to be forced to do avodah zarah, but he didn't have kavanah when he was doing it, what's like the halacha there?
Yeah. So the Rambam makes this very clear. Let's say a guy goes over to a person and says, bow down to that idol or I will kill you, like the Crusades, and a Jew bows down, but he doesn't believe in the idol, he doesn't believe in Jesus, he doesn't believe in any of it, he's doing it not to get killed. So the Rambam makes clear that although he still had a duty to give his life, because you can't even go through the motions, but in terms of culpability after the fact, he is not culpable. He will not be punished for idolatry. In other words, this is a very subtle distinction. You have to distinguish between the obligation of martyrdom before the fact and the chiyuv misa, the death penalty, after the fact. After the fact, the person is not guilty of anything because he didn't intend to worship the idol. But before the fact, since he's giving the impression of that, there is a duty to give your life before you give in. This is a point the Rambam makes in Yesod Torah, and this was a very important point. He wrote a public letter. There was a rabbi, there was a time during Islamic persecutions where people had to profess belief in Muhammad or they would be killed. And many, many Jews did that. And a rabbi told them, you are no longer Jewish, you are idolaters, and God doesn't care about your mitzvos anymore. And the Rambam wrote a very long letter. You could see his fury at this rabbi. And he said, how dare you make such a statement? These are Jews who may have had to give their lives, maybe, but after the fact, they are Jewish, they are beloved, they are not evil, they acted under duress, they acted under coercion, they did not mean any type of worship of these powers. They are Jews in good standing who certainly count for a minyan and everything else. So the Rambam was very, very emphatic on that teaching. Okay, we'll stop here. Thank you, and have a good Shabbos.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.